Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Dadsigner podcast. I am Michael Smith, the host of the podcast, and I am joined today by Felipe Herrera. Welcome to the show, Felipe.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, and I think you're our first South American guest, so I'm really excited about that. But why don't you tell folks a little bit about who you are, where you're from, your design background, and a bit about your family?
Absolutely. So, I think the most important thing that, first of all, is I'm a husband and a dad of three boys. From 24 is the oldest one. His name is Martin. He lives in Miami nowadays. And I have two younger boys, Simon 12 and Mateo 8. And we all live here in Bogota, Colombia, right now. And I'm very excited. I'm your first Latin American guest.
Yeah, it's really cool. We've had a couple in the UK, and I think I have a Canadian guest coming up. But yeah, first Latin American. It's awesome.
Yeah, so I actually went to school in the States to the now extinct Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale. I look young, but I'm not. I am turning 55 this year. So, to put into perspective, I went to college in the beginning of the 90s. Okay. So, that gives you a little bit of context of how long I've been. And at that time in the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, what I studied was what they called at that time advertising design. So it was a 2 year degree, and then you could continue doing marketing. And then after going to school, I started my career in the States, in Florida. So I worked freelance for a year and a half. Then I came back to Colombia. I started working in agencies mostly. And well, agencies sounds like a lot. I worked with one international agency, which was my only uh, work as an employee under an organization, an international organization, because I worked for them for 2 years. As I started as a graphic designer, and pretty quickly in an 8 month period, I ended up being creative director of a group of new young guys. Because to give you a little bit of context, I am part of the generation that grew on analog and took the transition into digital. And for me, that's exactly what happened when I came back to Colombia. All the digital stuff was starting to begin, like in 1993. The first digital camera that I went to an expo in Orlando. It was a huge event, like the first digital camera, and this was like the biggest apparatus, iPods, and they clicked, and it took like 1 minute for the image to raster. So that gives you a little perspective. And also at that time was the internet was starting to appear, and digital artwork for pre-press was starting to happen, because I learned about pre-press in the old school way, like different sheets for color coding papers. We didn't go out and shoot like for photographs. We either photocopy them in Kinkos, in Kinkos. We go into Kinkos and photocopy from existing photograph albums, like image bank. At that time, for you to get stock image, you would have to get a printed catalog from image bank or any photo banks like this, and they will mail you the the photographic slide for you to scan locally, get your picture, and then mail it back. So that gives you a little bit on context. So when I arrived to Colombia, after getting into this digital space, it happened that in the company I got my first job, there were a lot of talented guys, what they called in the lower floor. The lower floor was where everybody would get all the designs from the creative teams, and they will get it ready for pre-press or for presenting to clients. So there were a lot of talented people, and they were very good, at cutting with mat boards and cutting these pictures and coming up with things together. But at that time, that was like the entry level position for an agency, and I realized there were a lot of talented guys there, and I went to the owner of the agency. I said, listen, why don't we get one extra Apple computer, and one scanner and one color printer, and we could get a lot of work done. And they said, are you crazy? We're not going to invest in that. Because to put you into perspective, Michael, okay, buying a flatbed scanner that would help you scan 1200 DPI image would cost at that time around $7,000 in 1990. So I did the numbers. I went to the CFO. I said, listen, how much money do we spend in photocopies and how much money we spend in this, guys? And I came up with the business plan. I said, listen, if we buy this scanner, we buy this computer, we set up this station, and we're gonna be paying for this in the following 6 months. And they said yes, and that's what got me promoted very quickly, because they said, okay, this guy this is not coming up with different stuff. So that's how I started, like, professionally. But if I go down to my roots, my first design attempt started happening while I was in school. I like to draw. I'm not a good illustrator. I'm a terrible illustrator. I never even developed that skill. My first day at the art institute was with a drawing class, and when I got there, everybody around me, they were doing like this perfect human figures, and shading, and everything was wonderful. And I was literally doing like stick figures. They showed me this model. I was like stick figures, and I said, "Oh my God, why did I choose to to come here?" I went to my professor and I said, "I think I made a mistake. I'm not here." And he said, "Why?" And I explained to him, and he comes over and he starts laughing and said, "Don't worry, you're sitting next to the most talented students that we received this year. But yeah, you're way below the norm in drawing skills and illustration, but you'll do fine." So coming back, that those skills of being curious and using digital uh, tools to help me close that gap between not having the technical capacity for drawing or something like that, but having uh, the the capacity to imagine these beautiful things. So that's how I got started. And the first design I ever sold was a line sketch I did, like a bunch of surfers. It was horrible, but at that time the new neon inks for printing came on, and I found a shop and they printed it in three different neon colors, and I started selling those T-shirts, and they sold. So I think that's my first paid graphic design gig.
That's funny. Very cool. You when you look back at that first t-shirt, are you proud of what you created with like the tools that you had, or do you look back on it and you're like, "Ooh, this was early work. This was this was pretty bad."
No, absolutely. I really look into it, and I think I apply it today to all of my work, which is resource-based action. You work with what you have. Many people stop doing things because they believe that something is missing. I don't have time, or I don't have money, which are the most typical ones that we put as excuses for anything for us to embark on. Or I don't have the knowledge, or where do I where, but in the mindset of resource based planning and action, well, you work with what you have. And I think that's the beauty of design, is that you really work with what you have. You cannot stop creating if you put a barrier where you say, "Oh, I am missing this." No, the question is, how are you going to make it work with whatever is it that you have? And of course, that's a great analysis when you look back in time. So I love the question, but I think that has kept me, and I apply it in everything I do today, not only in graphic design itself, but in helping people and organizations come up with action plans to put their ideas into motion. Because the way design works is not only for graphic design, it's for designing a trip, for designing a product, for designing a plan, taking that action. So I think that resource based thinking is the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is it that you're doing now today, full time?
Well, right now I help people and organizations from all kinds of industries to amplify their impact. By amplifying their impact, the company that I founded 25 years ago, it's called Tengo Ideas, which is I have ideas in Spanish. So after my year and a half working in the first advertising agency, went into my entrepreneur life. In 2001, I came back to the States. That's when I started what today is Tengo Ideas. So people would ask me, what do you do? And my answer would be, oh, I'm a creative director. And by the middle of that sentence, it was, okay, another creative advertising guy, right? And after an experience that I went to visit a client that somebody referred to me. I was in Florida at that time and said, listen, I have this friend of mine. He has this business and he needs some brochures to be designed for a client of him. Can you visit him? I said, sure. I went to visit him. I said, tell me about your business. So this guy specialized in building stands, for shows. And he had won a great contract with a bunch of shoe manufacturers from China that would contract him to take them for 2 years to the six most important shoe shows around the states. And he said, "Okay, tell me about what do you need the brochures for?" So he explains to me that for the first shows that they had brought all these Chinese manufacturers, they were still having problems because from the 50 stands, around 10 or 11 would miss the show because they missed a flight in China or their visa got canceled. But they were left with these open spaces. They still had the merchandise. Um, of the people, but they couldn't open it, so they had to like typically close it with this graphics. I said that's ugly, so I thought that I would turn those spaces like into business centers, and I would like a brochure of all the catalog of all the products that I could put around and do like a business center and make it work. And I said, okay, yeah, that sounds good. But let me ask you a question. Do these people already paid for you to be there and you have their merchandise? I said, yeah. He said, yeah. I said, and but if they don't come, they don't pay a percentage because of their not coming. I said, okay, then why don't we connect them virtually? And he said, how would that work? I said, I don't know, maybe we could connect them through a T1 line. Skype, we put a big screen. They'll be sitting in China. Let's bring some hostesses that know how to speak Mandarin, and they'll be like the facilitators between the clients and maybe we can make it work. And he said, you know what? That's a great idea. Why don't you help me with that? And I said, yeah, we can do that. I said, let's fly out tomorrow to Vegas because we have a show tomorrow and we look at that to see how it works. And I said, yeah, okay, let's do it. And once I leave his office and said, okay, so I'll see you tomorrow at the airport. He was asking me, my details so he can set the tickets. And when I leave, he says, hey, listen, Felipe, you do have ideas, right? And I got in my car, Michael, and that's when it came to me. I said, okay, yeah, that's my value proposition. That's where I generate value because I believe that working with different clients when you're curious, and most designers are very curious people, yeah, you like to learn about the business. In my case, for example, when I got my first big account for a tuna company, which is one of the biggest tuna producers and distributors here in Latin America. And they sent me a brief, and I said, "This brief is not enough. You gotta take me there to your offices for a week, and I want to know what's the whole process and how do they fish the tuna. And if I can get on a tuna boat, get me there, you know." So when you're curious, you start to learn about all these uh, kinds of industries, processes, and that's how Tengo Ideas. Actually, 1 week later, I was registering Tengo Ideas in the United States, and that's how it started. So I changed from what is that you do? Oh, I'm a creative director, another guy like this, to what is that you do? And I said, I sell ideas. What do you mean that you sell ideas? Yeah. What do you need? What's your challenge? What do you want to accomplish? We can work and find the ideas that you need to make that happen. So that changed the perspective on how I would get clients and the type of clients and projects I worked with, because that took me from not only graphic design and marketing and communications and copywriting and all everything that's involved in that, but into thinking in business design processes. And in that sense, uh, I've been able to work in projects that range from helping organizations like Cemex, it's like one of the biggest cement companies in the world, to create their corporate responsibility volunteer program, for example, to helping organizations like Compass Group, which is a service provider, how to lower accident rates in their operations. And everything, Michael, is design based, you know. Everything is design based because I started concentrating on how to get solutions for different challenges based on design thinking, by following that same uh, um, uh, time framework to helping organizations to connect with their collective intelligence, because in most organizations the answers for most challenges are already there in
Yeah.
their workforce. We just don't have like the necessary frameworks or methodologies to access that information. So that's what I do with Tengo Ideas today, and I've since 2016 utilized most of my efforts in helping create entrepreneurial ecosystems in rural areas in Colombia, Mexico, Guatemala, Bangladesh, Tanzania, Uganda, uh, helping entrepreneurs build their businesses. So we train business facilitators that accelerate business growth for entrepreneurs locally. So my passion is all design related, into processes to help people and organizations amplify their impact and grow.
Yeah. That's incredible to go from probably a small brochure job to launching this idea business. But how was it that you what went about finding clients um, for that needed help, that needed this kind of thinking? Like, how did you position yourself, and how did you get those clients?
Well, you actually, it was the long and hard road, which is word of mouth,
Mm,
which is like the worst strategy anybody can employ, you know? But actually, that's how it started. And it happens to a lot of designers that they go about promoting their services because their work is so good and people refer to me, but that's the worst strategy at all. But for me, switching into that, it was actually that, and me being, wanting to talk about everything. The only So at the beginning, it was actually because for me it's always been about trial and error, of course, like any design process, right? But to start understanding, okay, how can I help people without having like a specific uh, tangible, deliverable, like a design. It's pretty straightforward. Say, oh, listen, I have a packaging design. Can you come up with idea or a logo? Or it's very tangible. But for me to switch into solutions that can have an impact on the business, but it's not always a specific deliverable like a design or something like that, but more of a result. You know, uh, so that was based on references. The only moment I really start proactively working on strategy to position myself as like the idea guy. Many people call me today and say they call me, "Hey, tengo ideas." Friends of mine say, "Hey, tengo ideas," or they come up and "Oh, you're the guy with the ideas. When do you come up with something?" So, but one of the first things I did is I had a T-shirt, a black and a white T-shirt, and I had um, in the bold Helvetica font, "Ask me, I have your idea," and I would walk with that T-shirt. I was like, "What do you mean you have my idea?" And say, "Yeah, what do you want to do?" So I started, like activating that word of mouth, but because of the interactions I had with people.
One of the things I am curious about, you have an older son and a couple younger ones, but you have this great sense of curiosity, of design thinking. As you raised your boys, how did you pass that down to them, or did you?
Well, actually, I think it's based more on having them watch me do things and take them with me more than, oh, this is the way that you should do it. And responding very quickly for all of the assignments that are related for them to think about, creating something. So, yeah, of course, I'm the go-to parent for anything that has to do with design and everything. But I think it's more based on responding to them when they are curious and they're building something or they're coming up with something. So it's more like that. How do I facilitate and partner with them and help them in that process, and let them be curious. I mean, the best thing that kids gives us is the reminder that you have to be curious and you have to be open, and when we start growing up, we start to think more logically and more squared, regardless of how creative you are. So yeah, I think it's more of them reminding me how to approach and act upon different solutions. I actually find myself a lot of times uh, like trying to correct uh, my kids' way of thinking or how they are approaching this problem, because I already know that that's the long way and maybe you should take a shortcut, and I find myself like, oh, no, 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 don't do that. You're breaking what should be the normal process of him of finding out that that's not the way. So yeah, I think it's more of an exercise of me to hold my reins and not spoil the already natural process that these kids have.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, I was chatting with someone yesterday just about the way kids are excited about, like, to show you different things when they've done something. It's usually like the first time they made something. They're like, "Look at this," and they're so proud of it, because they figured out how to do it, right? And so, I do a little bit of coaching on the side, and if there was someone that once told me, "Don't steal the revelation,"
Beautiful.
um,
Yeah.
which I love that phrase because it's a helpful reminder that it's actually the struggle of failure that gets us to learn new things and for those things to stick.
Yeah, absolutely. You should come up with. I'm sure that every interview has like this special line that either you have or some of your guests have. It would be a great T-shirt collection. Now that we were talking about,
Yeah. What would your line be?
I have a beautiful line. It's a Spanish expression, so I'm gonna try to translate it. So in Spanish, the expression is hacer el oso. Hacer el oso is like put yourself out there, be embarrassed. I don't know how to literally translate hacer el oso. Yeah, it's to it's better to to be embarrassed, and put yourself out there than doing nothing.
Mm,
So in Spanish, it's es mejor hacer el oso que no hacer nada. It's better to be embarrassed and go do things than do nothing. So it's always a win. I mean, the only thing that can happen bad, the only thing is that you are going to have a wonderful story to tell either your kids or your friends or at dinner, and that motion of you putting out there opens up a lot of doors, beautiful doors, that you wouldn't even imagine, because most of us spend our time wasting our time, don't spending, not even investing, wasting our time in other people's opinions.
mm,
Most of us, we don't take action because of that. So my phrase would be that I want to come up with the English, the most rhythmic English version of that, and I'll send it over to you.
yeah, yeah, I like that. I like that a lot, and I also love that. We talked about how you're the idea guy. Your friends are like, oh, what idea do you have? We're on this podcast, riffing. I'm learning about your story, and then you give me an idea for, oh, you should do this for your guests. So, it's true to your character through and through.
Yeah, I think so. I sometimes I walk into a business and I start asking the business owner, so when did you start this? And every time my kids are, oh, dad, again? Really? You come on, you're gonna go through the whole process of interviewing this guy so you can help him, give him ideas. So yeah, it's I might like addicted to it. I ask, I get in an Uber and I started asking the guy, so why did you get into Uber? And yeah, yeah, I'm an addict.
Yeah, yeah, that's really cool. Well, I appreciate you sharing a bit about your story and some of the ideas here. I have two more questions I want to ask you before we log off here, and those are, what has been your greatest parenting success, and then what has been your greatest parenting either learning or failure?
I would start with the failure, and I think my greatest failure, and the one that it's actually sinking right now at 55. Okay, because statistically speaking, I only have, if everything goes well, 30% of my rest of my life. And I think that one of the things that I regret the most is not starting in my healing journey sooner. I'm sure that if I had started my inner child, my story healing earlier, I would have been a great dad, because I know that not taking care of my wounds earlier in time uh, has prevented me maybe being the best version dad I've ever had. So yeah, I sometimes I do look at myself with a little regret, and maybe I'm very hard on myself. But yeah, so that's why I started with that, because that's one of the recent things that I've been thinking. And maybe my most successful parenting trait has been actually, showing trying my best to be an example to my kids, to be who you are regardless of what people think, even regardless of what I think, be who you are. And yeah, I think those are the most in that spectrum.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. If folks wanted to find you online or connect with you, where can they do that?
They can find me as Tengo Ideas. That's Tengo Ideas. Tengo Ideas. You can find me in all platforms. as Tengo Ideas.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat and sharing all the stories that you have. And yeah, we'll talk soon.